The first time she said it to him, she said it the way she said it to the drunks. Flat, low, no heat in her voice, one hand still holding the coffee pot, the other pointing at the corner booth by the window. "Sit." He sat. 41 people were in the diner at that moment. Nora Bennett counted them later, because Nora Bennett counted everything. 6 men at the counter. A woman with a baby in the second booth. The Ramos family finishing pancakes in the third. 2 truckers in the fourth. A boy of maybe 19 at the fifth. Doing homework he was pretending was homework. The Wednesday breakfast rush at Bennett's Coffee and Grill on the corner of Federal and Ash in a neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey that most people from outside the neighborhood did not stop in unless their car had broken down. Of those 41 people, 37 watched Damiano Vitale sit. They watched because they knew who he was, even if they had never seen his face before that morning. You did not have to have seen his face. You only had to have been alive in that quarter of the city for the last 4 years to have felt the weight of the name. Vitale, the one who had come up from Elizabeth in 2021 and taken the docks off the Bruno family in 18 months without a single body in the papers. The one whose men wore charcoal and never raised their voices. The one who, according to the whisper that had made it to the counter of Bennett's Coffee and Grill twice in the last month, was going to have a conversation with the woman who owned the corner property at Federal and Ash. Because the corner property at Federal and Ash sat on the exact parcel of land his development company needed to complete the block for a mixed-use bill that had already quietly been approved by 3 of 5 members of the planning board. The woman who owned the corner property at Federal and Ash was Nora Bennett, 34 years old, size 22, 5'6", dark brown hair in a low bun with a pencil through it, a grease burn on her left forearm from 2019 she had never bothered to have looked at. Owner, operator, cook, waitress, dishwasher, and bookkeeper of the diner her grandfather had opened in 1962 and left to her father in 1988, and her father had left to her in 2016 when the cancer took him in 7 months. The whisper had said Vitale was going to make her an offer. The whisper had not said what the offer was. Nora had heard the whisper twice, and she had shrugged twice, and she had gone on flipping eggs. Because in her experience, the men who wanted to buy her diner from her did most of their negotiating through lawyers and through envelopes and through the kind of pressure that showed up as a rat in a walk-in on a Tuesday morning. And if this Vitale was different, she would find out when he was different. And until then, she had a Wednesday breakfast rush to feed. He walked in at 7:41, alone. No overcoat despite the November cold. Charcoal suit, no tie, white shirt open at the collar. 2 men outside on the sidewalk, one leaning against the black sedan, one standing at the corner with his hands folded in front of him, both of them dressed so neatly they looked like the same photograph printed twice. Damiano Vitale walked to the counter. He stood at the counter. He did not sit. He waited to be looked at. Nora, who had been pouring a refill for old Mr. Alfaro at stool 3, finished the pour. She set the pot down on the warming plate. She turned. She looked at him. She said, "You are standing in the walkway." He blinked once. It was a very small blink. It was the blink of a man who had not, in 11 years, been told he was in the way of anything. "I beg your pardon," he said. "You are standing in the walkway," she said again, the same flat tone, no rise, no fall. "The girl who busses tables needs to get past you with a bin. You can stand at the register, or you can sit at the counter, or you can take that corner booth by the window, which I am pointing at right now because it is the one that is open and it is the one I would like you to sit in. Sit." He sat. He walked without hurrying and without hesitating to the corner booth by the window, and he sat down on the vinyl bench facing the door, the seat she noted that a man in his line of work would always take so that he could see who came in, and he folded his hands on the Formica in front of him and he waited. Nora finished pouring Mr. Deber Alfaro's coffee. She wiped the counter down. She refilled the sugar caddy at stool 5. She took an order from the boy at booth 5 who was pretending to do homework and who she had decided 6 weeks ago was probably running small deliveries for somebody but was not in her diner going to be doing anything worse than eating a short stack. She called the order back to the kitchen. She poured a fresh pot. She took a mug down from the shelf above the coffee station. Then, at 7:52, 11 minutes after Damiano Vitale had sat down in her corner booth, she walked over to him with the mug and the pot, and she set the mug down in front of him and she poured. She said, "Cream is in the little pitcher. Sugar is in the caddy. If you want food, Tell me now, because the rush is gonna move in 10 minutes, and after that, the grill gets slow." He looked up at her. His eyes were the color of the sky over the Passaic on a February morning, gray with something colder underneath. He said, "I am not here to eat." She said, "Then you are taking up a booth I could seat 2 paying customers in. So either you tell me you would like an egg, or you tell me what you came to say, and you tell me fast, because I have a diner to run and you are not, as far as I can tell, an emergency." There was a pause. It was, in the small history of Damiano Vitale, a notable pause. Enzo Marchetti, who was the man standing at the corner outside with his hands folded in front of him, would later tell his wife over dinner that in 11 years of working for Mr. Vitale, he had never once, not one time, seen his employer pause in front of another human being for the length of time he paused in front of the woman with the coffee pot that morning. Enzo's wife, who did not care about any of this, would say him and pass him the bread. Damiano said 2 eggs, over easy, rye toast, bacon, black coffee, which you have already poured, thank you. Nora nodded once. She wrote nothing down because she did not need to. She walked back to the pass and she called the order back to the kitchen, and she did not look at the corner booth again for 18 minutes. When the plate was ready, she brought it to him. She set it down. She said, "Eat first. Whatever you came to say will keep for 10 minutes. Cold eggs cannot be fixed." He ate. She refilled his coffee twice without asking. She cleared his plate when he was finished. She refilled the coffee a 3rd time, and she sat down across from him in the booth without asking, and she folded her hands on the Formica the way he had folded his an hour earlier, and she said, "All right, now." Damiano Vitale, who owned the port of Newark in everything but name, who had in the last 4 years moved through a city of 500,000 people the way a shark moves through a bathtub, opened his mouth to make the offer he had come to make. Nora Bennett cut him off. She said, "Before you say the number, I want you to know 3 things. First, my grandfather bought this corner in 1962 with money he saved washing dishes for a man on Ferry Street who paid him in cash and never once shorted him. Second, the last person who tried to buy this corner from me was a developer out of Hoboken who sent me a letter in 2022 with a number in it that had 6 zeros. And I wrote back on the bottom of the same letter 1 word, which was no, and I mailed it back to him in his own envelope. Third, and I want you to hear this one carefully, Mr. B. Deal, because it is the one that is going to save us both a lot of time. I am not for sale. This building is not for sale. This land is not for sale. And if you have come here to make me an offer, I am going to say no before you finish the sentence. You can then stand up. You can leave a tip if you were raised right, and you can go about your day, and I will go about mine. And neither of us will have wasted more than a plate of eggs on this conversation." She did not raise her voice. She did not smile. She did not blink more or less often than she had been blinking a minute earlier. Damiano Vitale, who had come to Bennett's Coffee and Grill that morning to buy a piece of land, closed his mouth. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, "May I ask you a different question, Ms. Bennett?" She said, "You may ask." He said, "Would you consider a partner?" She said, "No." He said, "Would you consider a loan?" She said, "No." He said, "Would you consider selling me the air rights above the building, leaving your ground floor operation entirely intact, allowing me to build above and around you in such a way that this diner as it exists on this corner is preserved in perpetuity, protected by a covenant I would sign in front of a notary of your choosing in exchange for a sum that, if invested conservatively, would generate enough monthly income to allow you to hire 2 additional cooks, replace the walk-in that I noticed on the way in has a compressor that is going to fail before Christmas, and never work a double shift again unless you chose to." Nora looked at him. She said, "How do you know my compressor is going to fail before Christmas?" He said, "Because I heard it running when I walked past the service door. It is on its 2nd bearing. I grew up in a restaurant, Ms. Bennett. My mother ran a place on Bloomfield Avenue for 29 years. I know what a dying compressor sounds like. I did not come here today to tell you what I know about your building. I came here to make you a bad offer. I would like, if you will permit it, to make you a better one." She held his eyes for what felt, to him, like a long time. She said, "Sit there. Do not move. I have a lunch prep to start." She got up. He sat there. He did not move. For 2 hours and 11 minutes he sat in the corner booth by the window at Bennett's Coffee and Grill. and he watched a size 22 woman in a grease-stained apron feed 41 people breakfast and start the prep for a lunch that would feed 60 more. And at no point in those 2 hours and 11 minutes did he take his phone out of his pocket, and at no point did he stand up, and at no point did he ask for anything. At 10 past 10, when the rush had cleared and the diner held only 3 lingering customers and the smell of frying onions had begun to replace the smell of bacon, Nora walked back over to the corner booth, and she sat down across from him again, and she said, "All right, tell me about the air rights." He told her about the air rights. He was, she discovered inside the first 4 minutes, better at this than she had expected. He did not condescend. He did not talk down. He did not use the words little lady or sweetheart or honey, which put him ahead of the last 3 men who had sat across from her at that same booth, trying to buy something from her. He drew a small diagram on a paper napkin with a pen he took from his inside jacket pocket. He explained the covenant. He explained the tax structure. He explained the number. The number was $2,400,000. Nora did not react to the number. She had learned, at 19, in a hospital hallway with a piece of paper in her hand, that reacting to a number was how a woman lost a negotiation before it started. She said, "Who drafts the covenant?" He said, "A lawyer of your choosing." "I will pay for the lawyer." "You will pick the lawyer." "If you do not know a lawyer, I will give you the names of 4 in this city who I have never used so that you cannot accuse me later of putting my thumb on the scale. And you will pick from among those 4 or from any other name you find on your own. I will not sit in the room during the drafting. I will sign what your lawyer sends me. If I find one word I cannot sign, I will call your lawyer, and your lawyer will call you, and you will decide." She said, "And when do I say no, and have you accepted?" He said, "You have already said no once this morning, Miss Bennet, and I accepted it. You are welcome to say no again, and I will accept that as well. I will not send another man to this door. I will not send a letter. I will not, if you say no a second time, come back myself. I do not do business with women who have to be persuaded twice." She looked at him. She said, "That is a nice line. Did you rehearse it?" He said, "Yes." She almost laughed. She caught it before it reached her face. But something in the muscle at the corner of her mouth moved, and he saw it, and his own eyes changed for a fraction of a second. The gray warmed by exactly 1 degree, and then it was gone, and they were both back where they had been. She said, "I am going to think about it. I am going to think about it until Friday. On Friday at 10 past 10 in the morning, when the rush is over, you may come back to this booth, and I will tell you what I have decided. You will not send anyone else in the meantime. You will not have anyone look at my books, or my building, or my compressor, or my walk-in. You will not have anyone follow me. If I find out that a single one of those things has happened between now and Friday, my answer will be no, and it will stay no, and no number you write on any napkin will change it. Do you understand me?" He said, "Yes, Miss Bennet, I understand you." She said, "Good, now stand up. I need the booth." He stood up. He put a $50 bill on the table for a plate of eggs and 3 cups of coffee. He nodded to her once. He walked to the door. Enzo, on the sidewalk, opened the sedan for him without a word. The sedan pulled away. Mr. Major? Alfaro, at stool 3, who had been watching the last 10 minutes of the conversation over the top of his newspaper, waited until the door had swung shut, and then he said, without looking up from his paper, "Nora, honey, do you know who that was?" She said, "I know who that was, Mr. Alfaro." He said, "And you told him to sit." She said, "He was in the walkway." Mr. Alfaro folded his paper. He set it down on the counter. He picked up his coffee cup and he took a long, slow sip. Then he said, to nobody in particular, "God bless this girl. God bless this diner. God bless this whole entire corner." She thought about it for 2 days. She thought about it while she prepped Thursday's soup, a lentil with a ham hock her grandmother had taught her to start with cold water. She thought about it while she scrubbed the flat top at Close on Thursday night. She thought about it in the shower at 4:40 in the morning on Friday, when the tile was cold under her feet and the pipes made the sound they made in the building that was 91 years old, $2,400,000. She did the math the way she did all her math, on the back of a receipt with a stubby pencil, at the kitchen table in the apartment above the diner where she had lived her entire adult life. Replace the compressor, $9,000. Replace the walk-in outright because the compressor was only the beginning, $28,000. New flat top, $12,000. Redo the plumbing in the customer bathroom, which had been sighing for 2 years. 14. Hire a second cook at a real wage, $42 a year. Hire a bookkeeper who was not her so that she could sleep at night, $30 a year. Put her mother who had been living in the apartment next door for 6 years and who had 3 months ago begun to leave the stove on into the good memory care place in Montclair instead of the state-run one in Irvington she was on the waiting list for, $94 a year, private pay, for as long as her mother was alive. Set aside a fund for the diner itself, a real fund, the kind of fund that meant that when the next thing broke, and something was always about to break, she did not have to lie awake wondering which credit card had room left on it. She wrote the numbers down. She added them up. She subtracted them from 2,400,000. She looked at what was left. What was left was the rest of her life. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then she got up. She poured herself a glass of water. She drank it standing at the sink. She looked at the framed photograph on the wall above the toaster. Her grandfather in 1962 standing in front of the just-opened diner in a white apron, one hand on the door frame, the other hand holding a set of keys, his mouth open in the middle of a word nobody had ever written down. She said out loud to the photograph, "Papa, I am going to sell him the sky." The photograph did not answer, but the pipes in the wall behind her made the sound they made, and the compressor 2 floors below her made the sound it made, and somewhere on Ash Street a garbage truck was already backing up in the dark, and Nora Bennett understood that a woman who has run a diner alone for 9 years is allowed once to let another person carry part of the weight, if that person has been made to sit down first and be looked at properly and understand exactly whose corner he is standing on. She went to bed. She slept for 3 hours. She got up at 7:10. She opened the diner at 7:30. She worked the rush. At 10:10, she sat down in the corner booth by the window across from Damiano Vitale, who had walked in at 10 sharp and had sat down without being told in the same seat as before. Hands folded on the Formica, and she said yes, on 7 conditions. He took a pen out of his inside jacket pocket. He said, "Tell me." The 7 conditions in the order she gave them to him that Friday morning in a corner booth in a diner in Newark on the back of a receipt for a plate of eggs and 3 cups of coffee were as follows. 1. The diner would remain hers whole, unencumbered, and untouched for as long as she was alive and for as long as any Bennett after her wished to run it. And the covenant would say so in language a jury could understand. 2. The new building above her would not at any point in construction or after be permitted to have an entrance that opened onto her diner that shared a wall with her diner, or that in any way suggested to a person walking down Federal Avenue that the diner and the tower were the same establishment. The diner would remain the diner. The tower would be the tower. If those 2 things touched in the mind of a single customer, she would consider it a breach. 3. During construction, which he had estimated at 19 months, the diner would remain open, and any inconvenience caused by the construction that measurably reduced her daily receipts would be compensated at the end of each month in cash, by comparison against the same month of the prior 3 years calculated by an accountant she chose and he paid. 4. She would not, at any point in the covenant or in any conversation with any of his men, be referred to as his partner, his associate, his friend, or his tenant. She was the seller, he was the buyer. They were, on paper and in speech, a transaction. What they were off paper was not, at this table, his business. 5. His men would not eat in her diner, not because she did not want their money, because she did not want the other customers to stop coming. And 40 years of running a neighborhood diner had taught her father, and her father had taught her, that a place that becomes known as that place where those men eat stops being a place where a woman with a baby will bring the baby. 6. If at any point she came to believe, on her own without persuasion, without a lawyer telling her, that the deal was hurting her diner or her neighborhood in ways she had not foreseen, she reserved the right to buy back the air rights at the same price he had paid for them adjusted for inflation, with no penalty and no argument, and the covenant would say so. 7. He would, before signing anything, sit down at her mother's table on a Sunday afternoon and let her mother look at him, because her mother, who on her lucid days was still the sharpest reader of a man's face on the whole east side of the city, was the one who was going to tell her whether the man across from her was lying to her about any of the other 6. He wrote all 7 down. He read all 7 back. He said, "I accept all 7. Sunday at 2. She said, "Sunday at 2. He said, "Ms. Bennett." She said, "Yes." He said, "May I ask a question that has nothing to do with the covenant?" She said, "You may ask." He said, "Why did you tell me to sit on Wednesday morning in that tone? I have thought about it for 2 days. I would like to know." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Because you were in the walkway, Mr. Vitale. That is the only reason. I did not know who you were. I would have said it to any man who was in the way of the girl with the bus bin. I have said it to worse men than you." He said, "I believe that." He paid for his coffee. He nodded to her once. He walked out. Sunday at 2, he came up the outside stairs to the apartment above the diner with a bottle of good Italian wine in one hand and a small tin of amaretti in the other, and no man at his shoulder, because Nora had made it a condition of the visit that Enzo wait in the car. He took his shoes off at the door without being asked, which she noted. He did not comment on the plastic runner in the hallway, which she also noted. He walked into the small living room where her mother Margaret was sitting in the good armchair by the window with a rosary in her lap, and he did not speak first. He waited. Margaret Bennett was 68 years old that Sunday, and she was having what Nora had learned to call a middle day. Not a good day, not a bad day. A day when her mother knew who she was, and knew who Nora was, and knew more or less what year it was, but did not always remember what she had said 4 minutes earlier, and sometimes reached for a word and found the wrong one. Margaret looked at Damiano Vitale for a long time. Damiano let her. Then Margaret said in Italian, "You have your father's mouth." Damiano, whose father had been dead since 2016, did not move. He said in Italian, "You knew my father, Signora." Margaret said, "I knew a Vitale who ran a fish counter in the old Mulberry Market in 1978. He had a mouth like yours. He was honest about the fish. He was not honest about the ice, but he was honest about the fish, and in that business, that was enough." "Are you his son?" Damiano said, "His grandson, Signora." Margaret said, "Ah. Then your grandmother was Concetta." Damiano said, "Yes, Signora." Margaret nodded slowly. She looked at Nora. She said in English, "Nora, he is telling the truth about who he is. I do not know yet whether he is telling the truth about anything else, but he is telling the truth about who he is. That is a place to start." Nora said, "Thank you, Mama." Margaret said to Damiano, "Sit." Damiano sat. He sat in the small side chair opposite Margaret's good armchair, and he sat there for 1 hour and 40 minutes, and he answered every question Margaret Bennett asked him, some of them twice, because she asked them twice, and he did not check the time, and he did not check his phone, and he did not at any point look at Nora for rescue. He talked about his mother's restaurant on Bloomfield Avenue and about the fish counter in 1978 and about a cousin of his who had married a cousin of Margaret's in 1994, which Margaret remembered and which Damiano, it turned out, remembered too. He drank 1 small glass of the wine he had brought. He ate 2 of the amaretti. He did not eat a third, even though Margaret pushed the tin toward him twice, because he had noticed on the first push that there were only 7 in the tin, and that Nora had not yet eaten one, and that Margaret liked them. At 3:40, Margaret's eyes began to do the thing they did when she was tiring, and Nora stood up, and Damiano stood up at the same second without being told, and Margaret said to him in Italian, "Come back next Sunday. Bring the same wine. Do not bring more amaretti. Nora will make the amaretti. You will eat hers." Damiano said in Italian, "Yes, Signora." He walked out. He put his shoes back on at the door. He did not look at Nora on the way past. At the top of the outside stairs he stopped, and he turned, and he said very quietly, "Miss Bennett, I have not in 11 years sat in a room for 1 hour and 40 minutes and been looked at that carefully by another human being. I want you to know that I understood the whole time that I was being looked at, and I want you to know that I did not mind it. Thank you for the afternoon." He went down the stairs. Nora stood in the doorway for a long time after the sedan pulled away. Behind her, in the living room, her mother said without turning her head, "Nora, that one is going to be trouble, but not the kind you have to be afraid of. The kind you have to make room for. There is a difference. Do not confuse them." Nora said, "No, Mama, I will not confuse them." The covenant was signed on a Wednesday 3 weeks later in the office of a lawyer named Rita Delgado on Broad Street, whom Nora had chosen out of the phone book because she had liked the plainness of the ad. Rita was 59 years old, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and had, according to a whisper Nora had heard at the diner the week before, once made a state senator cry in a deposition. Rita read the covenant out loud in her office, one clause at a time, and at 3 separate clauses she stopped and she looked at Damiano over the top of her glasses and she said, "Mr. Vitale, do you understand what this clause says?" And each time Damiano said, "Yes, Ms. Delgado. I understand what it says. That is why I am signing it." He signed it. Nora signed it. The wire hit her business account on Friday morning at 9:11 a.m. She stood at the little roll-top desk in the back office of the diner, and she looked at the number on the screen, and she did not react to the number, because she had learned at 19 years old in a hospital hallway with a piece of paper in her hand that reacting to a number was how a woman lost. And she had learned again at 34 years old in a corner booth in her own diner that not reacting to a number was how a woman won. She closed the laptop. She went out front. She poured coffee for the 6 a.m. regulars who were now the 11 a.m. regulars because 2 of them had retired since the last time she had done the math on their tips. At noon, she called the compressor guy. At 1, she called the flat top guy. At 2, she called Montclair. By Christmas, her mother was in the good memory care place in a room with a window that faced east, and Nora drove out 4 evenings a week to sit with her. And on the 5th evening, always a Sunday, Damiano drove out with her because Margaret had made him promise at their 3rd Sunday afternoon that he would. They were not, at that point, sleeping together. They were not, at that point, anything. They were a seller and a buyer who had signed a transaction and who 6 months into the transaction had discovered that they liked to sit in the same room in silence, and that liking to sit in the same room in silence with another person is not a small thing at any age, and is a very large thing at 34 and 41 when both of you have spent most of your adult life being talked at. The Bruno family found out about the deal in April. They found out because the groundbreaking on the tower was covered in 3 local papers and 1 industry newsletter, and because the industry newsletter, which was read by exactly the kind of person who read industry newsletters, mentioned that the corner parcel had been assembled by way of a noble air rights covenant negotiated directly with the ground floor owner, one Nora Bennett of Bennett's Coffee and Grill, and that the transaction was believed to have closed north of $2 million. The Bruno family read the newsletter on a Tuesday. On Wednesday at 7:11 a.m., their stereotype. Fibolita Tancia Vitale's men and were not from the neighborhood walked into Bennett's Coffee and Grill and sat down at the counter. They ordered nothing. They watched the room. When Nora came out of the kitchen with a tray of clean mugs, the one in the middle, an older man, mid-50s, silver at the temples, an expensive watch, smiled at her, and he said, "Ms. Bennett, Cesare Bruno sends his congratulations on your recent good fortune. He would like very much to have a conversation with you at your earliest convenience about a small matter that has come to his attention regarding the parcel at Federal and Ash," he suggested Friday. Nora set the tray of mugs down on the counter. She looked at the 3 men. She said in the same flat tone she had used 6 months earlier on a Wednesday morning, "No rise, no fall. You are in the walkway. There's a bus bin coming through. You can sit at the counter properly, or you can sit at a booth, or you can leave. But you will not stand in my walkway, and you will not, in my diner, deliver a message from a man who has not had the courtesy to come and deliver it himself. Sit down or leave." The man in the middle did not move. He said, still smiling, "Ms. Bennett, I do not think you understand the nature of," the Nora said, "sit down or leave." The 2 men at the counter, the 6 a.m. regulars, Mr. Alfaro at stool 3 and a retired iron worker named Danny Voss at stool 4, set their coffee cups down very slowly. The man in the middle looked at Nora. He looked at Mr. Alfaro. He looked at Mr. Alfaro. He looked at Danny Voss. He looked at Nora again. He said, "We will leave." She said, "Good." They left. She poured Mr. Alfaro a refill. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not, but her hands were, and in her experience, the hands were the part the room saw. At 7:48, she called Damiano. She said, 3 men were here at 7:11. "Not yours. A message from Cesare Bruno about the parcel. He wants a meeting Friday." I told them to sit down or leave, and they left. I am telling you not because I need you to do anything about it. I am telling you because we signed a covenant that says the diner is the diner and the tower is the tower, and Cesare Bruno does not appear to have read the covenant, and I would like to know what you intend to do about that before I decide what I intend to do about it. In that order. There was a pause on the line. Then Damiano said quietly, "Ms. Bennett, I would like to come to the diner at 10 past 10 this morning and sit in the corner booth by the window if that is acceptable to you." She said, "That is acceptable." He said, "Thank you." He came at 10 sharp. He sat in the corner booth. He waited. At 10 past 10, she sat down across from him with 2 cups of coffee and she said, "Talk." He talked. He told her that morning, at that booth, more than he had told her in 6 months of Sunday drives to Montclair. He told her about the Bruno family. He told her about his own father and about a warehouse fire in 2011 that a fire marshal had ruled electrical and that a man named Cesare Bruno had ruled paid for. He told her about a ledger in a drawer in his office with 51 names on it. He did not, at any point, ask her to be afraid. He did not ask her to be brave. He asked her one thing only. He said, "Miss Bennett, I would like your permission to handle Cesare Bruno in the way I have been preparing to handle him for 11 years. I am asking your permission because the way I handle him is going to become, whether you and I like it or not, part of the story of this corner. The papers will write about it. The neighborhood will remember it. Your diner will be in the background of the story because your diner is on the corner where the story finished. I do not want any of that to touch you without your knowing it was going to touch you. So I am asking, may I proceed?" She looked at him for a long time. She said, "What does handle him mean, Mr. Vitale? Say it in words." He said, "It means a federal indictment on 22 counts that has been sitting in a drawer in Boston for 4 years, waiting on one witness who has, as of Monday of this week, agreed to testify. It means Cesare Bruno spending the rest of his life in a federal facility in Colorado. It means no bodies. It means no fire. It means a trial and a verdict and a sentence. It means the slow way. That is what handling him means. I did not spend 11 years building the fast way. I spent 11 years building the slow way because the fast way puts men like me in the ground and men like him back on the street, and I have never in my life been interested in the fast way," she said, "and the 3 men in my diner this morning," he said, "will not come back, not because of anything I will do to them, because of what I will send to their employer tonight. There is a photograph in an envelope in my safe that Cesare Bruno has spent 17 years hoping does not exist. It exists. It has always existed. Tonight it will be couriered to his home with a note in my handwriting, and the note will say only, in Italian, 'Leave the woman on the corner alone. She has nothing to do with you and me. This is the last time I ask.' And he will leave the woman on the corner alone, because Cesare Bruno is many things, but he is not a stupid man, and he can read Italian, and he knows my handwriting." She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "All right, proceed, on one condition." He said, "Yes." She said, "When it is done, when the indictment is unsealed and the trial is over and the verdict is in and the man is on a bus to Colorado, you will come to this booth on the Friday after, at 10 past 10, and you will sit across from me and you will tell me in your own words that it is finished. I do not want to read it in a paper. I do not want to hear it from Enzo. I want it from your mouth in this booth on a Friday." He said, "Yes, Ms. Bennett." She said, "Good. Now stand up. I need the booth." He stood up. He said, at the door, "May I ask one more question?" She said, "You may ask." He said, "Would you have dinner with me? On a Saturday, at a restaurant that is not this one, ordered by someone who is not you, served to you by someone who is not you." She looked at him. She said, "Sit." He sat back down. She said, "Yes. But we are going to talk first about what dinner means, because I do not eat dinner with a man who has not sat here and told me plainly what he wants from the eating of it. I have been 34 years in this world, Mr. Vitale, and I have had exactly one man take me to a proper dinner and lie to me about what it meant, and I am not doing that again. So sit there, talk, tell me plainly." He talked plainly. He talked plainly for 11 minutes. At the end of the 11 minutes, she said, "All right. Saturday at 7, you will pick me up at the outside stairs. You will bring a coat because it is going to rain. You will not bring flowers because I do not have anything to put them in. You will bring your appetite because I do not go to a restaurant to watch a man push a plate around. Do you understand me?" He said, "Yes, Ms. Bennett," she said. "And when we are at the restaurant, you will call me Nora because I am going to call you Damiano because a woman does not eat a full dinner across from a man she is still calling Mr." He said, "Yes, Nora." She said, "Good." Now stand up, for real this time." He stood up. He walked out. She poured Mr. Alfaro a refill. Mr. Alfaro, without looking up from his paper, said, "Nora, honey." She said, "Yes, Mr. Alfaro." He said, "You told him to sit twice in one morning." She said, "He was in the walkway." Mr. Alfaro said, "He was not in the walkway the second time, Nora." She said, "No, Mr. Alfaro, he was not." Mr. Alfaro turned the page of his paper. He said, mildly, "God bless this diner." The dinner was on a Saturday. It rained. He brought a coat. He did not bring flowers. He called her Nora. She called him Damiano. He ate a full plate. She ate a full plate. They did not at any point in the meal discuss the Covenant or the Tower, or the parcel at Federal and Ash, or the three men, or the ledger, or Cesare Bruno, or any of the other things that had brought them to the same corner booth on the same Wednesday morning, 8 months earlier. They talked instead about his mother and about her father and about a movie he had not seen, but she had seen 12 times, and about the fish counter in the old Mulberry Market in 1978, and about whether proper cannoli shells should be fried in lard or in oil, which they disagreed on, but respectfully. He walked her to the outside stairs. He did not come up. He kissed the back of her hand at the base of the stairs once briefly, the way a man kisses a hand in a country that is not this one, and he said, "Thank you for the evening, Nora." And she said, "Thank you for the dinner, Damiano," and he waited on the sidewalk until she was inside with the door locked, and then he got in the sedan and Enzo drove him home. The federal indictment was unsealed the following March. The trial ran for 6 weeks. The verdict came in on a Thursday in May. Cesare Bruno was convicted on 19 of 22 counts, sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms, and transferred to a federal facility in Colorado on a Monday morning in June. The Friday after at 10 past 10, Damiano Vitale sat down in the corner booth by the window at Bennett's Coffee and Grill, and Nora Bennett sat down across from him with 2 cups of coffee, and he said quietly, "It is finished, Nora." She said, "Thank you, Damiano." He said, "There is one more thing I would like to ask you, if you will permit it." She said, "Ask." He took a small box out of his inside jacket pocket. He set it on the Formica between them. He did not open it. He said, "You will pick the ring, if the answer is yes. This is a placeholder. It was my mother's. I brought it because I could not, this morning, walk into this diner and ask you this question with empty hands. But you will pick the ring. You have picked everything else on this corner. You will pick this too." She looked at the box. She looked at him. She said, "Sit." He said, "I am sitting, Nora." She said, "I know. I said it because I wanted to say it one more time to you in this booth, because the first time I said it to you, I did not know who you were. And the second time I said it to you, I knew who you were and I said it anyway. And I want you to remember for the rest of our lives that in this booth, in this diner, on this corner, in this neighborhood, you were the man who sat when I told you to sit. Not because I owned you, not because you were less than me. Because you were, from the first Wednesday to this Friday, the only man who ever heard me the first time. And that is a rare thing, Damiano. That is a thing I am not going to find again. So the answer is yes. Pick the ring up. Put it back in your pocket. We will go on Sunday to a jeweler I have already picked. Because a woman who has run a diner alone for 9 years does not wait for a Friday to pick a jeweler. And we will do this properly. Do you understand me?" He said. "Yes, Nora." She said, "Good. Now stand up. I need the booth." He stood up. He walked to the counter. He paid for the 2 coffees. He nodded once to Mr. Ponder. Alfaro at stool 3, who nodded back without looking up from his paper. He walked out. The sedan pulled away. Mr. Alfaro turned the page of his paper. He said, without looking up, "Nora, honey." She said, without looking up, "Nora, honey." She said, "Yes, Mr. Alfaro." He said, "God bless this whole entire corner." They were married in September in a small church 3 blocks from the diner, with Margaret Bennett in the front pew on a good day, sharp-eyed and dressed in dark blue, holding a rosary in her lap and mouthing along with the whole of the Mass in Italian. Enzo stood beside Damiano. Rita Delgado, the lawyer, stood beside Nora. The reception was at the diner, closed for the day, 41 people at 11 tables, exactly the capacity of the room. And the food was cooked by 2 cooks Nora had hired in the spring and served by 3 of the neighborhood girls who had worked shifts for her since they were 15. Damiano washed the last of the dishes at midnight with his sleeves rolled to his elbows and a dish towel over his shoulder because Nora had told him to and because he had, by then, learned. The tower opened the following spring. It is a good building. It does not have an entrance on the diner side. If you walk down Federal Avenue in the morning, you will see at the corner of Ash a squat one-story diner with a hand-painted sign that reads Bennett's Coffee and Grill, since 1962, and above and behind it, set back on the parcel by a careful 11 feet, a tower of 42 stories that does not from the sidewalk appear to have anything to do with the diner at all. That is because it does not. That is in the covenant. Nora Bennett still runs the diner. She works the Wednesday morning rush herself every week. Because the Wednesday morning rush was the rush she was working, the morning a man in a charcoal suit walked in without a coat and stood in her walkway and was told to sit. And she does not intend to hand that particular shift to anyone else while she is still breathing. She still tells him to sit sometimes. She tells him to sit when he comes in from a long day and is standing in the doorway of their apartment above the diner with his coat still on and his mind still 4 blocks away in a conversation he had at 4 o'clock. She points at the chair at the small kitchen table. She says, "Sit," and he sits. And she puts a plate in front of him. And he eats. She tells him to sit when their daughter, who is 4 and who is named Margaret, and who has her grandfather's eyes, climbs onto his shoulders at bath time, and he tries to keep walking through the apartment with her up there because he thinks it is a game he can win. She says from the doorway of the bathroom, "Damiano, sit." And he sits on the closed lid of the toilet with their daughter on his shoulders, and their daughter laughs because their daughter has learned at 4 years old that in this apartment there is exactly one word that stops the world, and it is a word her mother says to her father in a flat, low tone with no heat in it, and it works every single time. And on Sunday nights when the diner is closed and the tower is quiet and the neighborhood is doing whatever the neighborhood does on a Sunday night, Nora Bennett and Damiano Vitale sit at the small kitchen table above the diner her grandfather opened in 1962. And they drink one small glass of good Italian wine, and they do not say very much, because they do not have to, and at some point in the evening, 9 usually sometimes 9:30, Nora will look at him over the rim of her glass and she will say quietly, "Sit closer." And he will. That is the story of the plus-size woman who ran a diner on the corner of Federal and Ash in Newark, New Jersey, and of the Mafia king who walked in one Wednesday morning to buy her land and was told to sit. She did not become someone else. She did not lose the weight. She did not close the diner. She did not in any moment of the marriage or in any moment of the decade that followed apologize for a single inch of herself to a single person, including the man she married, who would not have known what to do with the apology if he had received one, because he had from the first Wednesday understood that she was not a woman who apologized, and that this was the entire reason he had, without meaning to and without knowing it, sat down. Cesare Bruno died in a federal facility in Colorado in his 14th year of imprisonment. Margaret Bennett died on a Tuesday morning in Montclair, in the room with the window that faced east, holding her daughter's hand and asking, on her last lucid breath, in Italian, whether Damiano had brought the good wine. Nora said in Italian, "Yes, Mama, he brought it." Margaret said, "Good." Then she closed her eyes. The photograph on the wall above the toaster in the apartment above the diner is still there. Nora's grandfather, in 1962, in a white apron, one hand on the doorframe, the other holding a set of keys, his mouth open in the middle of a word nobody had ever written down. Beside it now, framed the same size, hangs a second photograph. It was taken at the wedding reception in the diner. Damiano Vitale in a dark suit with the jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a dish towel over his shoulder, standing at the sink behind the counter up to his forearms in soapy water, washing the last plate of the night. He is not looking at the camera. He is looking, in the photograph, at something out of frame. That is, if you know where to look, the reflection in the window above the sink of the woman who told him to do the dishes. She is not in the photograph. She did not have to be. The word above the sink, hand-painted by her grandfather in 1962 in careful block letters on the tile backsplash, is still there. And it is the same word she said to Damiano Vitale on a Wednesday morning at 7:41 in the walkway of Bennett's Coffee and Grill on the corner of Federal and Ash in Newark, New Jersey. The word is, sit. If this story kept you company tonight, through the rain, through the quiet, through whatever chair you are sitting in, please Please leave the word sit in the comments so I know you stayed to the end. Like the video if a plus-size heroine who runs the room and never once raises her voice is the kind of woman you want more stories about. Subscribe if you want a new full-length dark romance every week, told slowly, told carefully, told for the woman who has spent her whole life being talked at and who is finally, tonight, doing the telling. Sleep well, lock your doors, and remember, the woman who does not raise her voice is the woman the whole room learns to hear the first time. Good night.